Alright, there's a bunch of little niggly details that we need to work out to get Spark actually up and running on your desktop in standalone mode, so let's just go through them all and get them out of the way. Alright, we almost have a complete development environment for Spark installed on your desktop. Last thing we need to install is Spark itself. Now, there are actually many steps involved into getting Spark up and running on a Windows system, so please bear with me. Resist the temptation to skip this lecture because there are a lot of gotchas and little things that they don't mention in the documentation. So let's start by downloading the latest Apache Spark. So we'll just go to Google and search for Apache Spark. And here it is, spark.apache.org. We'll go to download. And we want the latest Spark release. We want the pre-built version for the latest version of Hadoop that they have. That'll save us a lot of trouble. And we will select a direct download. Now notice that we're pulling down a TGZ file here. That's tar and gzip compression. So just like we have zip files on Windows, for the world of Linux and Unix, they have TGZ files, if you're not familiar with those. And that's not something Windows can decompress on its own. So if you don't already have a program installed to handle TGZ files, you'll need to go get one right now. The one I use is called WinRAR. If you search for that, you can find it. It's at rarlab.com. And if you need to get that, you can pick up the latest installer for WinRAR for 64-bit or 32-bit Windows here, and that will let you decompress that TGZ file once it comes down. So if you do need to install something like WinRAR or 7-zip is another alternative that I've used before, please go take care of that now. This is the first of many steps we're going to take, so as we're following along here, feel free to press pause to stay caught up and perform each step that I talk about. So if you do need to install WinRAR, please hit pause, go take care of that now, and then come back and we'll move forward. Next step is to download Spark itself, so we will click on that friendly download Spark link, and here it comes. 268 megabytes later. It should be here momentarily. And keep in mind that Spark runs on top of the Java runtime environment ultimately, so it may seem a little bit weird to get a pre-built version for Windows that's the same as the pre-built version for Linux and everything else, but it's all platform independent, so it's kind of cool. All right, I have this in my downloads folder now. I'm going to go ahead and decompress that. So because WinRAR installed these little shell extensions here that let me go ahead and say extract to that big long folder name. All right, so we've decompressed that. There should be a new folder for it. Indeed, there it is, and a folder in the folder. So this is Spark itself, and now we need to find a permanent home for it. Let's create a place to put it now. So what I'm going to do is go to my C drive, and I'm going to create a new folder. Right-click, new folder, and I'm just going to call that Spark. And that's where Spark itself will live on my system. So go ahead and do that now. Create a Spark folder on your C drive. You can create it on some other drive if you want to as well, but you'll just have to remember where you put it, because later on we're going to input this path into an environment variable. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-A and then Control-C to copy all of the contents of Spark into the Spark folder I just created. Control-V to paste, and there we have Spark. All right. Again, hit pause if you need to catch up. We're getting there. Next thing we need to do is change the Spark configuration, because by default it will log an awful lot of error messages that we don't care about that are informational in nature, and they will drive you batty if you don't do something about them. So open up the conf folder inside your C Spark directory, and you'll see there's a log4j.properties.template file. And what you're going to want to do is right-click on that and say Open With, and select the WordPad application to edit that with for now. And what you want to do is up here where it says log4j.root category equals info, change that to warn at a minimum. Later on you might even want to change that to error to reduce the error spam even further, but warn is enough to at least make it less distracting. So once you've done that, hit save and close out. All right, now we need to remove the .template extension and just make that log4j.properties so that Spark actually reads it. And Windows will complain, say yes, and there we go. All right, we're getting there. Next thing we need to do is set some environment variables on our system. So that way Windows will know where we installed Spark and where to find the things that it needs. So let's go to our Start menu. I right-clicked on that, and I'm going to go to Control Panel, click on System and Security, System, follow along with me here, and Advanced System Settings. Okay, so we're in Control Panel, System and Security, System, Advanced System Settings, and then we're going to click on Environment Variables. Now the first thing we need to do is add an environment variable to tell Windows where we installed Spark. So I'm going to click on the New button for our user variables, and we're going to call it all uppercase Spark_home. And for the value, I'm going to type in the path of where I installed Spark, which was C:\\Spark. So again, hit pause if you need to go ahead and do that right now. When you're done, hit OK. Next, I need to add that path to my path, and that way I can run Spark programs from any directory that I want to without having to type in a full path to it, which makes life infinitely easier. Well, maybe not infinitely, but a lot easier. So find the path environment variable for your user variables and hit Edit. And what we're going to do is scroll all the way to the end of your path and type a semicolon followed by a %, Spark_home, %, bin. Okay. And obviously this is all done with Windows in mind. If you're using Linux or Mac OS, and there are different ways for setting environment variables, and that will depend on your OS. But for Windows, this is what you want to do. So again, go ahead and do that. Make sure that your path has semicolon, %, Spark_home, %, bin at the end, and hit OK. All right, now leave this up because we're not quite done with our environment variables yet. It turns out there's a little bit of a glitch in Spark on Windows where even if you're not using Hadoop with Spark, it still expects to find one little piece of Hadoop for Windows in your installation. And if it doesn't have it, Spark won't run at all, even though it doesn't need it. Maybe they'll fix that by the time you actually use this, but for now, there is one little hacky thing we have to do on Windows to get Spark working properly. So if you go to the resources for this folder, you should find a link to the winutils.exe file. And that is a little piece of Hadoop for Windows that Spark expects to find. Now I've already downloaded it here. Let's sort by name so I can find it more easily. winutils.exe. So I'm going to go ahead and download that from the resources for this lecture if you haven't already. Again, it's that big friendly blue resources button in the upper right hand corner of the lecture. Once you have that, copy it. And we're going to go to the C drive and create a new folder, and we'll just call it WinUtils. And inside that WinUtils folder, I'm going to create another folder called bin for binary. And inside the bin folder, I will paste in my winutils.exe file. Now, when you downloaded that, there's a good chance your browser freaked out a little bit because you're downloading an executable file off the internet. Oh my God, it might be malicious. It's not. There's no virus in here, I promise you. But if you do feel more comfortable getting it from somewhere else, feel free to do so. You can even install the entire Hadoop installation for Windows if you need to. But since you're not probably using your desktop as part of an actual cluster, that's likely not necessary. All right, finally, we need to tell Hadoop where that is. And we'll add one more environment variable here, and we're going to call it Hadoop_home. And we will set that to C:\winutils. All right, so go ahead and do that. Hit pause if you need to. And when we're done, we'll hit OK. All right, we are done with our environment variables, so I'm going to hit OK here. And get out of the System Properties control panel as well. All right, we are finally at a point where Spark should work. So let's go ahead and open up a command prompt. If you don't have a handy link to the command prompt like I do, you can just go to the Windows Start menu here and go on All Apps and scroll down to Windows System, and there's a command prompt there. So first thing I'm going to do is cd into the directory I installed Spark into, which in my case is C:\Spark. Do a little dir command to see what we have in here. Depending on the version of Spark you're using, this may look a little bit different. For example, the readme.md file is no longer distributed, but you should have a changes.txt file. So let's write a little simple Spark program to see if this actually works. We're going to write something that will count up the lines in the changes.txt file. And to do that, just to see if things are working, let's type in PySpark, just like that. And if you set up all of your environment variables correctly, you should get something that looks like this. And this is an interactive command prompt that lets you run Spark commands on a command line one at a time. So if you got this far, things are looking pretty good. If you do not see this, then you want to go back and double check your environment variables, and you might have to log back out and log back in for those environment variable changes to take effect. Another thing to be aware of is that if you installed Spark into a directory path that has spaces in it, that can cause problems. And also, if you have a path that is too long, that can also cause problems. So if you are running into trouble at this point, see if logging out and logging back in fixes it. If not, double check your environment variables, and failing that, take a look at whether your path is too long. Is there anything you can take out of there maybe to save some space? But assuming you got to this point, let's get you up and running. So let's type in a little simple 2-line Spark program here. I'll type in rdd equals sc.txt file, and we'll talk about what all this means later. Open parenthesis, open quote, changes, all uppercase, .txt, and on some file systems that's going to be case sensitive. And what that's going to do is load up our changes.txt file one line at a time into what's called a resilient distributed data set. And we'll talk about that more later. And now if we want to see how many lines got loaded up, we can just type in rdd.count, just like that. And it will actually launch off a parallel Spark program to count up the number of lines in the changes.txt file. And in my installation, it has 25,514 lines. So woohoo! We actually ran an actual Spark program here and got a real result. How cool is that? Now, depending on what version you have, you will probably get a different number than that, but that's okay. As long as you have a number that makes sense, that's what counts. So congratulations, if you got this far, you actually have Spark up and running. And now we can start to do cool stuff with it. So there you have it. Let's move on and actually dive in and do some more interesting stuff with Spark. All right, at this point, you should have a working Spark environment set up on your system. You should be able to run PySpark and run those little commands that I showed you there successfully. If not, just a few things it could be. First of all, if you were setting environment variables, sometimes you need to log out and log back in to actually make those environment variables stick and actually get applied. So that's the first thing to try. Another problem that comes up sometimes on Windows is that if your path gets too long, sometimes it can cause problems. So if you have a lot of other cruft and long path names inside your path variable, you might want to see if there's some things you can eliminate in there and get it back to the length that it was originally at before you added those additional paths to your path variable. Also, if you installed Spark to a directory that had spaces in it, sometimes that doesn't go over so well. So try to stick to my advice of just putting it in a Spark folder and don't get too creative. That could also cause problems. Finally, if you're on a system other than Windows, make sure to pay close attention to how to actually set environment variables on your system, because it does vary from OS to OS, and it's still important to get that right. But hopefully, you're not having any trouble. If you do, feel free to post in the discussions for this lecture and we'll try to help you out. Let's move on.